The first half of Elvis's concert in Birmingham had gone perfectly. The crowd was energetic, the band was tight, and Elvis was performing at the peak of his early career powers. But during the 15-minute intermission, while the audience milled around the lobby and Elvis retreated to his dressing room, a conversation was happening that would turn the entire evening upside down. Elvis had asked his tour manager a simple question. "I noticed the crowd is all white. Is that just how ticket sales worked out, or is something else going on?" The tour manager's uncomfortable pause told Elvis everything he needed to know before the explanation even came. The venue owner, working with local customs even though there was no explicit law requiring it, had discouraged black residents from purchasing tickets. They hadn't been explicitly banned. That would have been too obviously illegal. But they had been told tickets were sold out, or that prices were higher than they actually were, or simply turned away at the box office with vague excuses. The result was the same as official segregation. A completely white audience at a concert in a city that was 40% black, performing music that had its roots in black culture and black churches. Elvis stood there processing this information, his face showing an anger his tour manager had rarely seen. Then Elvis said something that made his manager panic. "We're not finishing this show. Not like this." If you want to discover how one decision in 1957 influenced the civil rights movement and changed how entertainers thought about performing in the South, please subscribe to our channel. This story has been called one of the most important moments in desegregating Southern entertainment. To understand what Elvis did that night, you need to understand Birmingham, Alabama in March 1957. This was 3 years after Brown v. Board of Education had declared school segregation unconstitutional. But Birmingham remained one of the most rigidly segregated cities in America. The city had no official law requiring concert venues to be segregated, but unofficial practices maintained racial separation in nearly every public space. Restaurant owners would claim to be out of seats when black customers arrived. Movie theaters had separate entrances and seating sections. Even public parks were divided by race. The system worked through a combination of custom, intimidation, and clever discrimination that stayed just barely within legal boundaries. The Birmingham Municipal Auditorium operated under this system. Venue manager Harold Mitchell didn't need a law telling him to keep audiences segregated. He knew what white patrons expected, knew what would keep his venue profitable in a city where challenging segregation could mean financial ruin or worse. When major touring acts came through Birmingham, the understanding was clear. Maintain the racial makeup that white audiences were comfortable with. Some performers objected quietly but still performed. Others never noticed or never asked, and some, like Elvis on that March night, decided they couldn't accept it. Elvis himself had grown up in Tupelo, Mississippi, in poverty that crossed racial lines. His family had lived in a neighborhood where black and white families shared the same economic desperation, where segregation was enforced by law but complicated by proximity and shared struggle. Elvis had attended black churches, had learned gospel music from black musicians who welcomed him despite the segregated world around them. His entire musical style was built on blues, gospel, and rhythm and blues, genres created and perfected by black artists. Standing on that stage, looking at an all-white crowd felt like a betrayal of everything that had made his music possible. When Elvis's tour manager, Tom Diskin, confirmed that black fans had been systematically prevented from purchasing tickets, Elvis's immediate response was to find Harold Mitchell and confront him directly. The conversation in Mitchell's office during that intermission was tense and revealed a fundamental clash in worldviews. Mitchell tried to explain that this was just how things worked in Birmingham, that he was following standard practices, that white audiences expected racial separation and wouldn't attend if venues integrated. He emphasized the financial realities, the business considerations, the practical necessities of operating in the South in 1957. Elvis listened, his anger building with every excuse. When Mitchell finished his explanation, Elvis's response was direct. "I don't care how things work. I don't care about your customs. I grew up listening to black musicians. I learned to sing in black churches. The music I'm performing out there came from black artists. And you're telling me you deliberately kept black people from hearing it?" Mitchell tried to appeal to business sense, reminding Elvis of the contract, the financial implications, the lawsuits that would follow if Elvis breached their agreement. Elvis cut him off. "This concert is over. Everyone in that audience is getting their money back. I'm not performing in a segregated venue." Mitchell's face went white. This wasn't just about one show. This was a financial disaster and a public relations nightmare. Tom Diskin tried to mediate, suggesting they finish this show and make demands about integration for any future Birmingham performances. Elvis refused. Finishing the show would send the message that segregation was acceptable as long as you got paid afterward. Walking out sent a different message, that some principles were more important than contracts or money or maintaining comfortable business relationships. Diskin warned Elvis about the consequences. They would almost certainly face lawsuits. Other Southern venues might refuse to book him. This could damage his career in a region that had made him famous. Elvis understood all of this. He walked out anyway. The audience returning from intermission had no idea what was coming. They were excited, energized, ready for more music. The house lights dimmed. The band members took their positions, though they looked uncertain, having been told something was happening, but not knowing exactly what. Then Elvis walked out, and everyone who knew him could tell immediately that something was wrong. He wasn't moving like an entertainer. He was moving like someone about to deliver difficult news. He grabbed the microphone, and the smile that usually accompanied his stage presence was completely absent. The crowd quieted, sensing trouble. Elvis's words were clear and direct. "I need to tell you all something, and you're probably not going to like it. I just learned that black people who wanted to come to this show tonight were prevented from buying tickets. Not because tickets were sold out, not because of any legitimate reason, but because someone decided this crowd should be whites only." The auditorium erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some angry, some defensive. Elvis continued over the noise. "Now I don't know about all of you, but I learned to sing from black musicians. I grew up listening to black music. Everything I do on this stage comes from traditions that black artists created. And the idea that they're not allowed to be here, not allowed to hear their own music being performed, that's wrong." The crowd's reaction was mixed and intense. Some people started applauding, agreeing with Elvis, moved by his stand. Others booed, angry that he was bringing race into what they saw as entertainment. Some started standing to leave, either in protest of Elvis's position or in agreement that staying would be endorsing segregation. The auditorium was in chaos, conversations breaking out everywhere, arguments starting. Elvis waited for the noise to die down enough that he could be heard again. His next words were the ones that would make headlines. "This concert is over. You're all getting refunds. I won't perform in a venue that practices segregation. I'm sorry to those of you who disagree with that decision, but this is something I have to do." Elvis left the stage and the auditorium descended into chaos. Some audience members were furious, demanding to speak to management, threatening lawsuits, calling Elvis everything from a race traitor to a communist sympathizer. Others were supportive, approaching venue staff to say they understood and respected Elvis's decision. Many were simply confused, having never witnessed anything like this before. Harold Mitchell found himself at the center of a public relations disaster. News crews, alerted by the commotion, arrived to document angry concertgoers demanding refunds and shouting opinions about Elvis's decision. Backstage, Elvis was dealing with his own team's panic. Tom Diskin was on the phone with lawyers, trying to understand their legal exposure. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's overall manager who handled broader career decisions, was furious when he heard what had happened, seeing only financial loss and Southern market damage. Band members were divided, some supportive of Elvis's stand, others worried about their own financial security given the tours that might be canceled as a result. But Elvis was calm, more certain about this decision than he had been about almost anything else in his career. When a reporter managed to get backstage and asked Elvis if he regretted the decision, Elvis's answer was simple. "The only thing I regret is that it took me this long to ask the question." The financial impact was immediate and significant. The refunded tickets meant Elvis received no payment for the night, despite the costs of venue rental, equipment, transportation, and staff. Mitchell filed a breach of contract lawsuit, though it would eventually be settled when the publicity around the case made continuing it untenable. More significantly, several other Southern venues canceled upcoming Elvis performances, either in solidarity with Mitchell or out of fear that Elvis would make similar demands for integration that they weren't willing to accommodate. The financial loss from canceled shows exceeded $50,000, a significant sum in 1957. But something else happened in the days following the walkout. Black community leaders in Birmingham, learning about Elvis's stand, reached out to white business owners and venue managers with a proposal. They wanted to attend concerts and were willing to purchase tickets at the same prices as white patrons. They pointed out that maintaining segregation wasn't just morally wrong, it was economically stupid, turning away paying customers based solely on race. The publicity from Elvis's walkout had created a moment where these conversations could happen, where the absurdity of segregation in entertainment venues was exposed to national scrutiny. Harold Mitchell, facing financial losses from the refunded concert and negative publicity that was affecting his venue's bookings, agreed to meet with these community leaders. The conversation was tense and difficult, but Mitchell was ultimately a businessman, and the business case for integration was becoming harder to ignore. 3 weeks after Elvis walked out, Mitchell announced that the Birmingham Municipal Auditorium would no longer practice any form of racial discrimination in ticket sales. When Elvis learned about this decision, he immediately contacted Mitchell and offered to return to Birmingham for a makeup concert, with one condition: the audience must be truly integrated, with tickets sold to anyone, regardless of race, on a first-come, first-served basis. The makeup concert happened in April 1957, and the audience was indeed integrated. Not 50-50, Birmingham was still too segregated and too tense for that level of immediate change. But there were black faces in that audience, something that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. Elvis donated his performance fee from that show to local civil rights organizations, turning what had been a financial loss into a statement that the walkout hadn't been about money, but about principle. The concert went smoothly, without incident, proving that integrated audiences could coexist peacefully, even in Birmingham in 1957. News of Elvis's walkout and the subsequent integration of the Birmingham venue spread through the entertainment industry. Other performers began asking questions about audience composition at Southern venues, making demands for integration as conditions of performance. Some venues resisted and lost bookings. Others recognized that the economic and publicity costs of maintaining segregation were becoming too high. The change was slow and incomplete. Real integration of Southern entertainment venues wouldn't be fully achieved until after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But Elvis's walkout created momentum and demonstrated that entertainers could use their economic power to push for social change. Black newspapers covered the story extensively, with many editorials praising Elvis for his stand, while also noting the irony that a white performer was receiving credit for fighting segregation, while black activists had been doing the same work for years with far less publicity. This criticism was valid and important. Elvis's walkout was significant, but it existed in a context of sustained civil rights activism by black leaders and organizers who had been fighting segregation long before Elvis took his stand, and would continue fighting long after. What Elvis's action demonstrated was that white people, particularly white people with economic power, could be allies in this fight, using their privilege to challenge systems that they benefited from but didn't create. In later interviews, Elvis was uncomfortable with being called a civil rights hero. He recognized that his action, while costly to him personally, involved far less risk than what black activists face daily. He wasn't going to be beaten or arrested or have his house firebombed for walking out of a concert. The worst that would happen was financial loss and career damage. Significant problems, but not life-threatening ones. Elvis insisted that what he did should be considered basic decency rather than heroism. That refusing to perform for segregated audiences should be the minimum standard rather than an exceptional act worthy of praise. But Elvis also understood that his action mattered because of his visibility and economic power. When a major touring act walked out and cost a venue significant money, it sent a message that segregation had business consequences, not just moral ones. Other performers who might have stayed silent saw that taking a stand was possible, that you could challenge segregation without destroying your career. And some young people in that audience, both black and white, witnessed someone they admired choosing principle over profit, demonstrating that social change was possible if enough people were willing to accept the cost of fighting for it. The Birmingham walkout happened in March 1957. Just months before the Little Rock Nine would face violent mobs trying to integrate Central High School in Arkansas. 3 years before the Greensboro sit-ins would galvanize the student civil rights movement. 6 years before the Birmingham campaign and Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. It was a small moment in the larger civil rights struggle, but it was part of building the momentum that would eventually dismantle Jim Crow. Every integrated venue, every broken barrier, every instance of someone with power choosing to challenge segregation rather than accept it, contributed to creating the conditions where larger change became possible. Today, the story of Elvis's walkout serves multiple purposes. It's a reminder that the civil rights movement wasn't just about the major events we remember, the marches, the speeches, the legislation, but also about countless smaller moments of resistance and change. It's an example of what allyship can look like, using your privilege and power to challenge systems of oppression, accepting personal cost to fight for others' rights, recognizing that silence or neutrality in the face of injustice is itself a choice with moral implications. And it's a reminder that progress is never inevitable, that every advance toward justice required someone deciding that the status quo was unacceptable, and being willing to sacrifice something to change it. The story of Elvis walking out of that Birmingham concert offers lessons that remain relevant today. First, that economic power can be a tool for social change when people are willing to use it. Elvis's walkout cost the venue money and created financial consequences for maintaining segregation. That business pressure, combined with moral arguments from civil rights activists, contributed to change. Second, that allies need to be willing to accept costs for their principles. Elvis lost money and faced career consequences for his stand. Real allyship isn't convenient or cost-free. Third, that individual actions, while not sufficient to create systemic change alone, can be part of building momentum toward larger transformations. Elvis's walkout didn't end segregation, but it contributed to a cultural shift that made segregation harder to maintain. Finally, the story reminds us that fighting injustice requires recognizing when our own comfort or profit depends on others' oppression, and being willing to disrupt that comfort. Elvis could have finished that concert, collected his payment, and avoided all the complications that followed his walkout. Many performers in his position did exactly that. But Elvis recognized that performing for that segregated audience would make him complicit in maintaining segregation, and he chose disruption over complicity. That choice cost him financially, but defined his character in ways that transcended his music. On March 23, 1957, Elvis Presley walked out of the Birmingham Municipal Auditorium and refused to finish a concert because black fans had been deliberately excluded. It was a decision that cost him money, created legal problems, and complicated his career in the South. It was also a decision that helped integrate one of Birmingham's major venues, influenced other performers to make similar stands, and demonstrated that entertainers could use their platform and economic power to fight segregation. The music Elvis was supposed to perform that night came from black traditions and black artists. Walking out when black fans were excluded was, in Elvis's view, simply honoring the sources of his art and refusing to profit from their exclusion. That's not heroism, that's basic respect and decency. But in Birmingham in 1957, even basic respect required courage.